We know you're here today because you care and you want to learn, and because it's training that you can take back to your classroom. And so one of the things that we try to focus on is putting those two things together, the instruction side along with the compliance side. We don't want to do anything on compliance that doesn't impact instruction, and we want instruction to help impact our compliance. And what we mean by that is, this first topic is confidentiality, okay? And so we're going to talk to you about the do's and don'ts of confidentiality. We're going to look at some scenarios. We're going to really try to put the work in your hands a little bit toward the end, but I'm going to do some talking here a little bit about what confidentiality is and how it impacts you in the school. And so one of the things that we know is that students have the right to have information about them kept private. You guys understand that, right? There's a law that started way back in 1974. I was 8 years old. Tell you how old I am. In 1974, James Buckley, who was a senator at the time, wrote an amendment to the education law that was going in, and just so happened it went in about the time Nixon left office. He resigned because of Watergate, and Gerald Ford took over and they signed it into law, and Ferpa became a law. And it was really about, and I listened to a podcast this morning with James Buckley speaking. He's 97 years old now. 97 years young, we should say, right? And he was talking about his intent for the law was that parents at that time were being kept from knowing what schools' what records they were keeping on students. If they did an evaluation, or if they did any kind of had any kind of discipline record, that information wasn't always readily available, and the school just kind of felt like that belonged to them, and they would not share that with a parent. We know that's not right, and so his intention was that the information that public schools were keeping on students could be shared with parents. Now, one of the key concepts is that when we're talking with a parent, and I did this throughout my career and it never failed me. If I'm talking to a parent about a student, I'm talking to only them about their student. And you guys know that. I don't have to tell you that. You guys have been around the schools. You know that can get you in trouble quicker than anything in terms of maybe violating someone's rights, or maybe saying something you shouldn't say about another person's or another parent's student. And so when I coached, I was a high school basketball coach for many, many years. I was a high school baseball coach for many years. If a parent came in and wanted to talk to me, I quickly would set that groundwork and say, I'll talk to you about your child, but I will not talk to you about anyone else's child. And that boded me very well, just from a practical standpoint. And so when you can't help but run into someone at the grocery store, right? You can't help but run into someone at Walmart that you have their student, and you want to talk to them, right? So just be real careful in your communication. Be real careful in your talk. And it's been a good rule of thumb for me. And again, it's up to you. But I never would say, hey, the second baseman's not getting the job done, but we're talking to the first baseman's dad, right? Stay away from that. If you can that will keep you in a good standing with information. Now, there's some different types of information. There's personally identifiable information that we're going to talk about today, and there's information that is registry information. And it kind of, and the presentation will kind of tell you about that. I can't go any further without telling you that the presentation that you're seeing, Miss Brenda Combs put together. She's taught me more about special education, about confidentiality than I could ever have learned on my own. And so she typically does this, and we have a video embedded in this presentation, and we can send this to you in your email. And you can go back and watch her presentation, watch her, if you have questions afterwards, there's some stuff you can take with you, is what I'm trying to say, that you can review, and she does a much better job of covering the ins and outs of it, of what confidentiality is. And so getting back to what I was talking about before, though, when we do training, we always, no matter what the topic is, we always try to model good teaching, okay? And later today, I'm going to talk to the whole group again at the 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock hour about accommodations and modifications and specially designed instruction. And so one of the things that we always try to do is model good teaching while we're talking to you about whatever it is we're talking to you about. Whatever concept we're looking at, whatever thing we're also not just having you do what you're doing right now, which is sit there and listen to one voice, okay? We know that sometimes that's necessary. That's a part of instruction. But we also know that students don't like to sit all day long and listen to a talking head, right? We also know adults don't like that, right? So right now what I want you to do is we do this thing, I do this in all my trainings, it's engagement cycle, okay? One of the things that we know that moves the needle for learning, whether it be adult learning or students with disability learning, is to have folks engaged in the topic, okay? Have folks engaged in the concept. So right now, what I want to do, if we're talking about working in small groups, I might just pull an element from explicit instruction. Nita Archer is one of my favorite teachers, and I might just number you, okay? So I'd say you're a 1, and you're a 2, and you're a 1, and you're a 2, and you're a 1, okay? So even if you have an uneven number, 1s can talk to 2, and 2 can talk to 1. You see what I'm saying? So you wouldn't ever go 1, 2, 3. You just go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. All right? 1, 2, 1, 2. All right? Or 1, 2, 1, 2. Now you got your number? 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. All right? So, and I went here like this, right? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Right? Okay. So the topic is confidentiality. Okay? The topic is confidentiality. So what I want you to do right now is I want you just to, if you got a piece of paper or something you can write with, just flip a piece of paper over on the back, and I want you just to think about what confidentiality is to you and what it means to you. Just kind of write a definition down of what you think it might be, and she'll give you some.
I'll put it back this up.
Okay, that's fine. So we want you kind of thinking about it. So we're going to have you do this. In your small group instruction, when you're working with small groups of kids, research says the more you can get students engaged and the more you can get them to respond, the deeper the learning, the more permanent the learning, the more that it's going to transfer, the more it's going to be generalized to other settings, the more they're going to take it with them outside and use it. Okay? So we're going to try to crystallize the learning here. Now, here's the way the engagement cycle runs. When we say, okay, we're going to want you to talk about, we want you to write about confidentiality on your paper on your own. We don't want you to look and talk to anyone. We want you to do it in a silo is what we call it. Okay? You know what a silo is, right? Those things that you're in there by yourself, right? You're in there, so that's the first thing. And then we'll take it another step. We'll say, all right, then we want you to tell your elbow partner, tell two what your answer was. And then we would have you go back then, after you listen to the discussion amongst all your peeps and your elbow partners, you go back to your page and you rewrite or add to anything that you might have learned from someone else. And then the whole group is going to be responsible for sharing their answer. Okay? The whole group, somebody may be called on to share your answer, right? I I've got everybody doing it, right? So right now, that's what we're going to do. We're going to practice here. All right, we're going to do confidentiality. So you write what you think confidentiality is. Tell us what you think you can share, what you can't share, those kinds of things, all right? How has it been presented to you in the past? Do you know anything about it? Do you not know anything about it? But right now, I want you just to, in your silo, I want you to write about confidentiality. Now I'm going to close my mouth, which is hard for me to do. Now, as far as, see, I can't close my mouth very long. The other thing I got to add here is while you're writing, I'm going to be peeking, okay? I'm going to be looking. We got this little phrase we call look around, walk around, talk around. And I like that talk around part the best, right? So I'm looking to see, is everybody engaged? Is everybody working? But also, what's the content of what you're putting down there? And I'm also on the fly getting some feedback from my students to tell me where I need to go next. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm walking around, looking around, talking around, and I can just see you guys in your small groups doing this when you go back to your class. You put them in a small group, you've got a concept you're going to work on, you're going to reinforce something the teacher's taught, and you're going to work with them closely and carefully, but you're going to force them to be engaged. Don't ever let them off the hook, because see, everybody at the table thinks they may have to speak here in a minute, right? And you might just have to speak. I might shut up and let you speak. So I'm looking, I'm walking around. That,
And the fact that they're expected of something, it helps with behavior.
I never know how to shut up.
okay. So now,
This is a big lesson for me.
once you get finished, as soon as you put that pen down, then I want ones to tell twos what your answer is. Okay, that's very specific directions right now. We're structuring this, we're scripting this as closely as possible as we can. Ones tell twos what your answer is. Have that discussion. Go ahead, it's okay to talk.
I gotta wait till my pen gets done.
Yeah, and twos can tell ones, and then you're going to go back and rewrite. Go back and rewrite. Let's start right here. Tell us what you came up with after your discussion. Tell us, did you learn anything from your neighbor? Just tell us whatever you want to tell us about confidentiality.
My definition I put down myself was only share information about the student you're asked about. Do not bring up or mention any other student's name, behavior, etc. during your conversation. Well, as we were mingling, I love the information, just keeping it private. I mean,
Yes.
it's only in that circle, within that circle that
Right.
you need to communicate with anybody.
And, you know, we have this thing called the need to know or the right to know within the school. Just because you work in the school doesn't necessarily mean
That you need to know.
about somebody down the hallway, right? So what did you come up with? Did you have anything to add to that?
I said, I don't think you should talk to anybody about other people's problems, but with the per student or parents of that student.
Right.
The other day I was asked about, at the hair salon, about an IEP. I said, I don't know nothing about IEPs. I said, I don't do that. So that's what I told her.
That was a great answer. That was a great answer and great way of handling
Well,
that.
it's the truth, because I don't have.
Well, and that's okay. That's okay. And sometimes you just have to be you have to have some discretion, don't you?
It was
And
about her grandson.
and you heard what she said. She wanted to know about her grandson. She wanted to know about something that was in the IEP. And they will. When I say the public will try, if they think you might know something that they want to know, they will make it sound so nice and sweet sometimes. So you have to be careful. And that's not to say everybody's out to get you. I don't mean it like that. But I'm telling you, people have their ways of trying to extract things that they don't, they may or may not. And let me tell you something. You may say, well, that's grandma. Okay. She probably has the right to know. But really sometimes Parents don't want the grandparents to know, or there might be some trouble within the family, or somebody might be raising somebody else's kid. You know, it can get down a rabbit hole quick, is what we're saying, right? So you did a really good job there. What would you have to add to that?
Well, basically, I just feel like you need to keep the information pertaining to a student within the circle that's entitled to know the information. I mean, and that's basically what we're all saying.
Right.
Don't talk about it to anybody that don't need to know.
Don't talk about it to anybody that doesn't need to know. I'll tell y'all a quick story. My son was in the 3rd grade. He's now 25 years old and has his own teaching job in Fayette County. And he coaches basketball at Asbury University. And he was, he had some health issues when he was born. He had this thing called craniosynostosis, which is a big word. It means the soft spot was closed prematurely. So his brain didn't have room to grow. You know, your brain grows up to about age 5 or 6. And so you have to have that expansion there. That's what the soft spot's for, okay? He didn't have one. It was closed. So they had to go in and make him a soft spot. 9 hours at UK, cut him up. So when he was in the 3rd grade, I had just become the head basketball coach at East Ridge High School in Pike County. And his mother was teaching kindergarten. And we were doing all these things. And he kind of got a little bit lost, and we kind of felt like, you know, he was needing some extra time and this kind of thing to do some things. Never really, it was more of a maturity thing. It was it's almost like it stunted his growth a little bit, or stunted his development. Like he was pulling up when he did the surgery, but when he got out after 7 days of ICU, he was back to trying to pull up. Does that make sense? So that development when he was that young, at 8.5 months old, he kind of lost a few steps, and it kind of caught up with him by 3rd grade. And he didn't have the best education situation that year. And so, I don't know what happened, but anyway, nevertheless, I was at the grocery store, and I heard some people talking, and I heard them mention my son's name. And it was the preacher at our church talking to his 3rd grade teacher about the fact that he hadn't turned something in. Oh, I went through the roof. Okay, you can only imagine, right? That's the kind of scenario we're talking about. Okay, the preacher probably didn't mean anything really by it. The teacher probably didn't mean anything by it. They were just talking. They had seen me, both of them had seen me in the store. And then I was one aisle over. We were at Food City, and here they were, you know. I whipped, before I even realized, my head blew off, and I whipped around through there, and I said what I said. But that's the kind of thing that can cause trouble, right? That's the kind of thing that, and my son's gone on and done really well, graduated with honors, and he's done exceedingly well. We've been blessed. But at that time, he was struggling a little bit. You know, just needed a little bit of extra time. And maybe he had played a little bit too much basketball and didn't do his work. Maybe that's what it was all about. You know what I'm saying? But nevertheless, you can get yourself in a big world of hurt. Okay, what do you have to add?
Only tell the person the information they need to know.
Only tell the person the information that they need to know. Everything's good here. Everything's good. We're getting it, right? How about you? What did you have to say?
Kind of similar, as I said, you know, that confidentiality is privacy and respect of the student and family. It means, you know, being trustful, like, you know, they trust you with their child. Also means not talking to other coworkers in the building that doesn't have any dealings with that child, that student.
Right.
Yeah.
Very, very good.
And watch, if you are talking to somebody that has dealings with that student, watch your
Who's listening?
being private, being in a room
Yes.
with closed doors.
You can't go down to the water cooler, so to speak, right? Like, you know, on the Seinfeld episode, you can't do that, right? You just can't do that. Yeah, so how about over here?
Same thing, especially with the privacy part. Once you share things with kids or talk to kids and stuff, and they see that you're, you know, with them, that you're, you know, like respect their privacy, and you don't talk about them, or you try to help them, try to explain things, you develop their trust. And, you know, that, it's all the same thing. Everything that everybody says, it's the same thing with everything. That's why you don't repeat, you don't talk, and you don't wanna talk about one child in front of another child. And
Right.
so on and so on. Just
And do you guys agree that it's important not to talk about somebody else's student too?
Yes.
That's major, isn't it? That really is.
Don't be out gossiping
Don't be out gossiping, that's right.
about students' information.
Right. The preacher will even talk about that, right? You're not supposed to gossip.
People does.
Yeah, but they do it anyway.
To me, I try to remember that could be my child when I want someone discussing.
Gosh, that's a
my
great
son,
perspective.
You know, information. And if they confront you and ask about the IEP, then tell them to talk to the teacher.
Right.
They know I don't have questions, call the teacher.
Yeah. And that IEP meeting is a due process kind of thing. And before you know it, it can be pulled into a situation where people are talking about lawsuits and mediation and hearings and all kinds of uncomfortable stuff, right?
I have something to add to you.
Okay.
I've got a child with a disability.
Okay.
But I never did like when teachers would talk to other teachers, like when your child, you might have this child next year, and tell all this stuff about that child, and he's done this, and you know, like,
You're
almost like
exact-
they're gonna dread him. You know what I'm
You're
saying?
exactly right. I taught at the 9th grade. When I was first a special ed teacher, I was I got the incoming freshmen and taught them basic math and basic social studies. At that time we didn't have co-teaching as much. You know, we kind of had a school within the school. You know, we had resource classes all day long for everybody, and that's a long time ago. Okay, back '88. So that's when I started. So I tell you that to tell you that I agree with you 100%. We would do these transition meetings from grade school to high school, and you'd hear all these horror stories about, you know, that transition teacher would tell you, oh, this kid does, he does this, and you just wait till you get him. That's what you'd hear. And then for some reason, that never would come to fruition really, because your own perspective, your own lens, the circumstances, the classroom, all the environmental stuff comes into play, and rarely does the kid live up to what they've been billed as. Rarely. I mean, sometimes they do. I'm not going to say they don't always, but you're exactly right. I agree with you. And then one of the things that my wife taught me and she was a really good kindergarten teacher and taught for 30 years as a kindergarten teacher, and she's back working as an ESS daytime person in the 5th grade at an elementary school in Pike County. And she worked with 2 other kindergarten teachers in this, you know, for years. They worked together. And she had a philosophy. You know how they get the informational sheet on them, like at the beginning? You got all this social developmental history, if you will, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. But my wife would not read those. She did not want to know about so-and-so's uncle and what environmental and what the socioeconomic status was. And she wanted to make her mind up on her own. She wanted to form her own opinion of the student after they got to her and she got to work with them, she got to know them, and she got to see. She didn't want any preconceived notions. Other teachers wanted to read everything ahead of time and kind of have some notion of what's going on. So what my wife taught me about that was that it's important to allow a student to be who they are within your classroom. It's important to let a student be who they are when they're working with you, to be who they are, and to not have any preconceived notions, because it might color the way you treat that child, right? It may color the way you teach that child. It may just be something that you don't need to know in order to be an effective educator. And so I think that's a very well taken point. Did everybody have a chance to speak? I'll leave you out now. Don't leave you out. Same thing.
You just forgive me.
No.
Keeping student information private, never discussing personal information about a child except to its parents.
Okay. Perfect. And so I'm going to go to the board here for a little bit and just pull some things up, and we'll kind of go back through some of the do's and don'ts of the law. And while I'm doing that, what I would like for you to do is I'd like for you to turn your paper just like that right there. okay? And I'd like for you to put your name on it, okay? And the school that you work in, okay? So you can do it, and you make it stand up just like that right there. Ha, I couldn't do it 100. See?
We got stuff on the back here, so.
No, here's paper. Here's paper. Yeah. Did I give you all some? Some of that long paper. Put your name. I want to get to know you guys, okay? I want to get to know you. And I meant to do that earlier before we jumped in, but I just jumped right into this confidentiality. Now, let's recap real quick what we just did. Because what I want you to do is take some skill with you when you leave, okay? So, how many of you work in small groups with kids? Do all of you at some point or the other work in a small group? Okay, so this is a really good engagement piece, a really good way of rolling out and having students respond, okay? So remember, we said what moves the needle for students, all students, not just students with disabilities, is to have them engaged in the lesson, have them responding. And let's just think about how you responded to me just then. You responded by thinking, you responded by writing, you responded by talking to your neighbor, and then you rewrote, and then you responded to the whole group. How many different responses? So getting high levels of response from your students, whether it be writing, talking, thinking, speaking, whatever, that's the way to do it. Get those levels, those numbers of times in that small group. If you're working with them for 20 minutes, they should be responding to you many times within that 20 minutes. Okay? Not just give them a sheet and turn around and walk away, right? Not just talk to them all day like I'm doing you right now, but you actually have them working with the information and the back and forth stuff going on, okay? So hopefully you'll take that with you. That's one of the top practices when we look at the research, and what the research tells us that works for students is that we get them responding, and that for students with disabilities, we do a lot of practice, right? We do a lot of practice of that, okay? So let's look up here. The objectives today, and again, any lesson that we start with, we're always going to talk about what our objectives are. Becoming aware of the legal implications of confidentiality and developing skills to respond to others who might request confidential information about students. Now we have a law. We talked about that law, that 1974. It was part of the Buckley, it's kind of referred to as the Buckley Amendment, okay? The 1974 law, the Family Education Right to Privacy Act, Ferpa. Sometimes we got a lot of acronyms in special ed, don't we? We have a ton of, IEP, BIP, SDI, BD, EBD. We got all kinds of acronyms. So this is another one of those acronyms. Family Education Right to Privacy Act is a federal law that protects the privacy of student education records. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you thought about students grading other students' work? Have you ever thought about that? And does that, in your mind right now, I want you to think and jot. I want you to think and jot, okay? What I mean by that, I want you to think and write. What's your answer to that? Have you ever thought about that being a violation of Ferpa? And do you think it is? I want you to answer that question. Do you think students grading other students in the class's quiz is a violation of student Ferpa law? Is it or is it not? We're talking about the privacy of student education records. This law applies to all schools that receive federal funds. So if you work at Wolfe County, or if you work, where'd you guys say you worked? McGoffin County. So we got Wolfe County and McGoffin County. Hey, you get federal funds. So we're covered by this law, okay? But think about that. You've seen it happen, right?
Yep.
The teacher gives a quiz, exchange papers, and us grade our papers. Is that a violation? All right. So let's hear from you. Now, we just did a think and jot right now, so we're staying in our silo. We're not really comparing our answers. We just want to hear what you think. What?
I think yes.
Angie. Angie Fannin, McGoffin County High School. Miss Angie Fannin, what do you think?
I think yes. I don't think they should be doing that. I mean,
Okay. Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in? Anybody have any different feelings about that? Anybody want to disagree with Angie? What do you think?
I say yes.
You think it's a violation?
I think so. I mean, it kind of shows this one's not very smart, this one is. I mean, it kind of shows you the child, you know, how smart, how
Okay.
not.
What do you guys think?
I think it could be a violation. But now, we did it when I was in grade school. I remember us grading each
Oh,
other.
gosh, yes.
I mean,
Back then,
Yes.
Nobody paid any attention
Right.
to that.
But
But
now-
now
No,
they-
nobody pays any attention to that, right?
Right.
Well, let me tell you the down and dirty of it. The key here is that quiz and what's going on in that classroom has not become an educational record yet. So what we're talking about in confidentiality is educational records. You see the difference? So this is not protected under the Ferpa law, okay? This is not a protected kind of information. Now, if you, and I think about this a lot because I teach a college class, and we use a Google Classroom where, you know, people can see lots of things. And so we have to really work hard to keep everything private there, you know, as far as the grades are concerned. So I think if you're revealing grades, you say, hey, look, he got an F. You know what I'm saying? That's a different kind of thing, right? But if in the process, and what the judge said in this actually went to the Supreme Court, what the judge said was that information that the kid is learning, it's more about the lesson and the reinforcement of the lesson, okay? So there's something to be gained there, and they felt like that was going to tie the hands. You know, if you went all the way back, if you asked a kid a question, they got it wrong, is that protected? You see what I'm saying? If you're just in the process of teaching, it's not an educational record yet, okay? So I think that's a little bit of a stumper, but that was one that you know, I was reviewing as I was preparing for this presentation, and it come up and I was like, you know what? I can remember being in grade school, just like you said, and doing that all day long. Spelling test. Oh, he missed 4, you know. And kids are kids, you know, they're going to do that a little bit. But that piece of information does not become a school record until it, you know, turns into a grade, and then the grade becomes that student record information.
I can remember teachers like letting a student grade a stack of papers just to help them out.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. And I've done it too. I have. I can't. I'm guilty. So let's look for a second here at the rest of the information on this sheet here. So we're thinking about vital information. There's a website here that you can go to that tells you everything you want to know about protecting student privacy. But we're just going to pull out the high points here. Vital information. Schools must have written permission from a parent or eligible student to release any information from a student's education record except to specified parties noted under the law. This may include the school employee records, teacher personal notes, and law enforcement unit records. The student's education record, personal directory information, what we're talking about, name, telephone number, address, social security number, those types of things, right? Data on student progress, observation of student behavior, discipline records, attendance records, information recorded in school through any electronic form. Education data collection and observations. Assume all types of information about a child, handwritten and or electronic, will be seen and subject to subpoena. So if you write a note, you have to be cautious. If you write a note about a student, that could turn into an educational record. So just be careful about that. Sharing of information through written. You know, one of the things I always said, you know, we use text now. We use Facebook Messenger. We use Facebook. We use Instagram. We use TikTok, right? It's everywhere. So we have to be cautious ourselves as education professionals about our communication, okay? So you wouldn't ever want to write anything about a student in a text. You see what I'm saying? Even, I think you got to be careful even if you're talking to that parent. You know, now, If you're talking about we're going to have a field trip and you're making an announcement, that's one thing. Or, we need you to bring this, or, hey, I sent home these records, look for this, that's different. But if you've got some identifiable information, or you put that the student got this on a particular test, or you put that this is the student's social security number, you guys know. I mean, you just can't do that. I am always careful to never put in a text anything that I wouldn't want out there, right? If it's confidential information, I'm not putting it in writing, right? I'm not going to do that. Just save yourself the headache, okay? So anyway, that's what we're talking about. It says, always be cautious, access administrative support before releasing any part of a student's record, written or oral. And so I found this do's and don'ts, and you can see right here that Brenda's video is right there. So, we can send this to your email, and you can watch that video, and she does a really good job of covering the depth of this. We only had an hour and 15 minutes today. This is typically, about a 2 hour or 2 to 3 hour training. So, I already had this open. I don't know why I did that again. Let's see if I can make that a little larger. So, right here is the Family Education Right to Privacy is a federal law that requires confidentiality of student information by telling schools what information it may share, when and who they may share such information with. It also gives parents the right to consent to the disclosure of their child's personally identifiable information. And educational records are records directly relating to the student that are maintained by the school or a third party that the school enlists for certain functions. For example, a company. I think Infinite Campus, right? So you got to be careful with sharing your password. If you have a password in Infinite Campus, or if your teacher gives you their password so you can help them with their records, they really shouldn't be doing that probably. Directory information. Directory information is education records that are generally not considered harmful to the student if publicly released, such as name, age, address, and grade level. Personally identifying information can either be directory information or non-directory information. So you see the difference in the types of information here as it's laid out in this nice handy-dandy little handout here. Non-directory information is education records that are more sensitive than directory information, such as Social Security and student ID number, grades, disciplinary history, and attendance records. What does this mean for me? Under Ferpa, you cannot share the non-directory P2 or P, personally identifiable information without parental consent. Generally, you can share directory information without the parent's consent unless parents have told the school otherwise. So you would know that probably. So think carefully about whether an activity like an online assignment submission program means sharing student information without parental consent. On the back page is a list of do's and don'ts for some routine classroom activities. Let's look at those. Ferpa do's and don'ts. Let's look at the do's first. Do ask yourself, am I sharing student information? Can someone personally identify my student from this information? Do I have parental consent? Now, let's go back and think just really quickly, and I may have been a little confusing up front in my use of directory and non-directory information. Directory information is education records that are generally not considered harmful to students if publicly released. So schools can release some of those things unless they have directions from the parents not to do so. So non-directory information is name, age, address, and grade level. Okay? So that's your directory information. And then your non-directory information goes a little deeper. If I got your Social Security number, I may be able to get to your bank records, kind of thing. You see what I'm saying? And student ID numbers, that can get you into the database in Infinite Campus. If you were to happen to stumble into Infinite Campus, put the SSID number in, it brings that kid right up, right? So we've got to be careful of those things. Grades, disciplinary history, and attendance records. Now, let's think about for a second, and there was a court case in Iowa. It actually got to the state Supreme Court level in Iowa. The court case was about the football player. Two football players actually sexually assaulted this co-ed, okay? And the school said, we're not releasing any information on this, right? And the reporters were like, well, you have to release some of this because we need to know, and it's, you know, it's criminal activity, da-da-da-da-da, and they didn't do it. But then they later found out that on the other hand, on the other side, that if students at University of Iowa were applying for a permit to carry a gun, they would release all kinds of information about them. How much school they'd missed, whether they'd had any disciplinary problems, what the high school had told them about their disciplinary problem. So you can see the double standard there. They were protecting the football players versus just anybody, any commoner. They were just releasing information. So they really fixed them on that and said, you know, look, the university has the right to release certain information, directory information, but not non-directory information. That's what it came down to. And you know, the real long and short of this is that there's a threat that if you do this, the procedural law that can come into play here, you have to make a formal complaint to the State Department of Education about a Ferpa violation, okay? And if you're getting federal funds, there's a chance that funds can be held. To this day, from 1974 to this day forward, there is no record of any school district ever losing any money over a Ferpa violation. Now, that's not to say that there hasn't been some private awards from being sued over it, okay? But as far as the government forcing a school district to pay money back, they've never done that. Now, I was working in Pike County in 1993, and we were forced to give back $1 million of money because of practices in special ed, okay? I've not seen that happen much in the state of Kentucky, but that did happen in 1993. And it had nothing to do with FERPA. It had to do with IEP writing and proper evaluations and putting kids in that didn't. We were actually found in violation of putting students in special ed that didn't belong in special ed and getting money for them. And so we had to pay the money back because the test hadn't been completed appropriately. So, but as far as FERPA is concerned, no state has had to pay the federal government back any money they've gotten for the education of students with disabilities over a FERPA violation. But that's not to say you can't be sued over it, okay? So don't think this is any kind of insulation here, because you can be sued over FERPA violations, okay? Not to scare you up or anything. So what does this mean? It says under FERPA you cannot share non-directory, and just like they told the University of Iowa, you've got to be careful with the things you're sharing here, right? You can't just share this information without permission, okay? And so that's where we go with it. Let's go on and see what the rest of this says. Get back to the do's. Do ask yourself, am I sharing student information? Can someone personally identify my student from this information? Do I have parental consent? Do check your school's annual FERPA notice to see which education records it has designated as directory information. So your school should have a listing of what directory information is. Do check with the administration office to see if parents have told the school not to share their child's directory information. Do shred student documents before disposal. Do use education technology pre-approved by your school. Do check the parental consent before including non-directory information in a student recommendation. Don'ts. Don't use ed tech programs that your school does not have a contract. Check with your school administration if you're unsure whether a contract exists. Don't send student grades or other non-directory information via email. Again, putting that stuff in writing, we talked about that earlier, right? Be careful about that. Don't do it, would be my recommendation. Don't put things in there that you can't call back. Don't publicly post students' personal information online without parental consent. And don't use social networks to connect students with classroom pages and events without parental consent. Again, being very careful in this day and age about the use of technology, about the use of social media. It's just you really need to think about what you're doing, and that non-directory information is a no-no. Okay? So you got to really, really be careful about that. And then on down here, tips. Records that you keep for your own personal memory aid and are for your eyes only, like classroom notes, are usually not subject to, I said usually. You can't always say 100% about anything, but they're not subject to Ferpa. You may disclose non-directory information in an emergency, that is when it is necessary to protect the health and safety of the student. So that's the one time that you can possibly say, okay, if it's going to help identify some medical issue, or it's going to keep them safe or keep their life from being harmed, then that's a time when you could do that. And then the rest of this is like a bibliography page. So let's go back to our okay, so it's about 10:02, and we've come to this point where let me go back up here just one second. And let's take a peek at this studentprivacy.ed. Let's just look at this for a second. So it's much like any other government place. You can go in and you can read all you want to read about what the U.S. Department of Education is committing to protecting student privacy. We administer and enforce student privacy laws such as Ferpa and the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. In addition, we provide technical assistance to help schools and school districts safeguard information about students. To learn more about federal student privacy law and your rights, please see the short video to the right and explore these other resources. You got your Ferpa parents or students general guidance. You got frequently asked questions about photos and videos. You know that I know when I was director at Pikeville Independent, somebody was always wanting to take a picture, put something in a student newspaper, put something on television. If you've got students with disabilities, you have to have a release to you know, and I think they do it with all students. The student has the right to refuse to be included in a newspaper article. They have the right to refuse to be included in a news report and that kind of thing. So just be careful with that. You know, if you're you know, local reporter wants to come and do a story on your classroom, whatever, you just have to be really careful about that, and you have to make sure that your school doesn't have they send out all kinds of information that the parent has to fill out each year, right? There's records they have to fill out, registration, this kind of thing, and there's a form that talks about media and what you can use and what you can't use, and that kind of thing. So just be aware of that, okay? So if you want to read more about this and you want to learn more, this frequently asked questions is a really good place, and there's the regulations on both the laws.
The Ferpa is to protect the privacy of parents and students with regard to education records under Section 444 of the General Education Provisions Act as amended. Wow, it's easy to get confused with all that.
That's why it's going fast.
Let's try that again in plain English. The truth is, data about us is everywhere. It's collected when we shop, take a vacation, look at a web page, or send an email. You see, Ferpa is a federal law that applies to most schools, colleges, and universities. It's meant to protect all that identifiable information about students in records that are kept by schools, and it provides the right for you to access that information, to seek to correct it, and generally to consent to its disclosure. Let's take a closer look at what that also requires schools provide Patrick's parents the ability to review his records to make sure they are accurate. Patrick's applying to college. He and his parents review his high school transcript and discover the school has gotten Patrick confused with another student who has lower grades. This isn't good. Ferpa not only gives his parents the right to see the records, but also to request that the school correct mistakes. If Patrick's parents and the school disagree on the accuracy of the info, Ferpa gives Patrick's parents the right to request a hearing. Colleges and universities are also required to protect student information under Ferpa, but the rules change a bit. Meet Lisa, a high school graduate who is headed off to college. Hooray! While Lisa was in elementary, middle, and high school, and under the age of 18, Ferpa allowed her parents access to her education records. Now, Lisa is entering college, and her Ferpa rights transfer from her parents to her. Her parents wonder, but wait a minute, I'm paying the bills here, and now I can't
Okay,
see how she's doing
so
accurately.
the whole
Since Lisa's
idea-
parents claim her as a dependent on their federal tax return, her parents can still see her education
Well, we just got
records
about a minute.
if Lisa's college chooses to release them. Ferpa doesn't require schools to release records. It only allows this. You may be wondering, how do I find out more about how Ferpa affects me or my child? To start, look for your school or school district's Ferpa policy on its website, or ask your principal or school administrative staff about your rights under Ferpa. Visit the Department of Education's Family Policy Compliance Office website for answers to frequently asked questions on privacy, training, and guidance for parents and students on Ferpa rights and protections.
Okay, so maybe you didn't hear that very well, but it just really recapped the difference between directory information, non-directory information, the fact that parents have the rights to review the records that you keep. You don't necessarily have to always give them a copy, but if there's something wrong in those records, they have the recourse to get that corrected. And one of the reasons I wanted to show you the video, and I wish I had the microphone. I thought that would be louder, so I apologize. But what I wanted you to see there was we've talked about the information. We've worked with the information. But we also got a visual and an auditory representation of the information again. Okay? So when you're working with your students, reinforcement in a different mode is very important. You see what I'm saying? So I know that some students learn best by hearing. Like my sister, we're all musicians in my family, okay? My sister can learn the words to a song just like that. I cannot. I have to write it down, and I have to work with it, and I have to relate it to something, okay? So there's different modes of learning. Some people learn by seeing. I have to see it and work with it, and I have to relate it, okay? I have to really work at learning the words to a song in order to present it. My sister can hear it. She's an auditory learner. I'm not. But the research says that the more modes we can hit within that classroom, the more deeper and the more permanent and the more crystallized the learning will become for your students. So when you're working with your students, if they're not getting it the way you're teaching it, we look for a different mode. We show them a different way, right? We show them a video. We let them work with it. We put the sand out on the table and we let them draw it right there in the sand. We let them feel it, right? There's There's tactile, kinesthetic. That's you learn by moving and working. There's also paper and pencil or book learning, where you work with the information or you hear it or you see it. Those are the four modes. It's VARC. It's visual, auditory, it's reading and writing, and kinesthetic. Those are your modes. So using the video to reinforce what we've been talking about all day helps crystallize that in your mind. That was the intent, okay? So the last thing we got is you have a scenario on your paper, and I want you to read through the scenario and answer the questions, okay? Do the three real quick. I want you to read through those. We got about a minute here. Just do the first one. Just do the first one. Okay? I know we're getting close. Do that first scenario, and then we will. Brenda has the answers for you, and so we're going to let you see those answers. Just read through and consider that. Okay?